This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Telly Edwards. Tonight's top stories. First, phone talks between South Korea's foreign minister and the U.S. Secretary of State on North Korea, trilateral ties with Japan, and an invitation to Washington. We unpack a return to Trump-style diplomacy. Now, impeached South Korean President Yoon's ex-defense minister takes responsibility for that brief martial law decree, as fresh data shows that the ongoing political turmoil caused the economy to stall towards the end of last year. And China plans to channel hundreds of billions of yuan from state-owned insurers into shares in its latest bid to boost the stock market and restore confidence in Asia's largest economy. Same-sex marriage is officially legal in Thailand. Hundreds of couples receive marriage certificates after the king's royal assent following Parliament's historic approval. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, China's powering ahead with plans to build the world's largest hydropower project in Tibet to feed its growing thirst for energy. Safety concerns aside, it's also triggering backlash from neighbors. American foreign policy in focus. The United States is hailing its alliance with South Korea as the linchpin of peace and security on the Korean peninsula. Now, the two countries' top diplomats had their first phone call today and agreed to continue their defense cooperation against North Korea. Well, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, on his second day in office, spoke to South Korea's Foreign Minister Choi Tae-yul. The U.S. State Department says the two men pledged to strengthen their trilateral relationship with Japan. Mr. Rubio also invited Mr. Che to visit the U.S. Well, earlier on Tuesday, Mr. Rubio met his counterparts from the Quad grouping of Japan, India, and Australia and repeated his commitment to countering China. In a joint statement, the group promised to work towards a free and open Indo-Pacific. After the Quad meeting, Mr. Rubio called his Philippine counterpart to communicate Washington's ironclad commitment under their mutual defense treaty. He condemned Beijing's actions in the South China Sea as dangerous and destabilizing, saying that it undermines regional peace and stability and is consistent with international law. Tensions between Manila and Beijing have grown in recent years over their competing claims in the South China Sea. Well, the U.S. has deployed its Typhoon missile system to new locations in the Philippines. The cruise missiles in the launches are capable of hitting targets in both China and Russia from their locations. Reports quote an unnamed senior government official in the Philippines as saying that the redeployment is meant to determine how fast the launcher can be moved to a firing position. Neither Manila nor the Indo-Pacific Command, overseeing American forces in the region, have identified the new locations, but the command clarified that the redeployment does not indicate permanent positioning in the Philippines. Now, both China and Russia had condemned the missile system's first deployment during training exercises back in April last year. They accused the U.S. of fueling an arms race. The criticism has not deterred Washington's plans, with more than 800 missiles scheduled to be brought into the region in the next 5 years. The latest move prompted Beijing's criticism, calling it an extremely irresponsible choice for Filipinos and various Southeast Asian countries and for regional security. Right, for more insights into how the security situation could evolve in the East Asian region and beyond, we are joined now in the studio by Tong Zhao, who is a senior fellow at Carnegie China, joining us now. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Zhao. So first up, I want to talk about the U.S. strategy, right? I mean, Marco Rubio, he met the Quad members 2 days ago. Today, he had these phone conversations. Help us understand what sort of specific actions you think the new U.S. administration is going to take to counter China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific? And I guess, how are they even going to measure success?
I think for Rubio, his top priority is to implement Trump's America First strategy. And to achieve that goal, I think the mainstream think tankers and strategists in Washington, they understand the United States cannot accomplish that mission alone. It has to needs help from allies and friends. And Quad was really highlighted during the Biden administration as part of this unilateral strategy for the United States to work more closely with allies to counter China's growing influence. But over time, I think questions were raised. Some members, like India, wanted to maintain a balanced approach dealing with both China and the United States. So the relevance of Quad as a geostrategic mini alliance is becoming increasingly questioned. And also the United States, its commitment to such mechanisms, especially with Trump's demanding allies, friends doing more and reducing potential American support and security commitment, are raising questions. So I think this is a very strong signal for the second Trump administration to send to its ally that they are still committed to this effort to build stronger alliances, to build more adaptive alliances with like-minded countries, selected countries from the region. And I think in terms of mirroring success, I think one thing is to look at whether these countries would continue working with the United States to strengthen an independent and robust supply chain, to reduce their collective reliance on China's supply chain materials and technologies, whether they would deepen their security cooperation, more joint military exercises, more joint and stronger pushback against China's military expansion in the region, and also at international institutions like UN, would they work together on diplomatic initiatives from the United States and to counter China's growing diplomatic influence internationally.
Yeah, so we've talked about the U.S. strategy. I want to talk about China's strategy now. I'm curious to know, how far do you think China is willing to push back against U.S. efforts to maintain this, free and open Indo-Pacific? And I guess what forms might this pushback take?
I think especially to counter the second Trump administration's perceived more hostile strategy against China, including its efforts to strengthen cooperation with allies. China's goal at the general level is really to make the United States appear more isolated internationally because of Trump's problematic policies on America first, etc. So again, to deepen Beijing's traditional strategy on divide and conquer, Beijing wants to drive a wedge between the United States and its regional allies. We have seen China trying to mend ties with Japan, South Korea. It tries to keep calm when it comes to disputes with the Philippines over South China Sea. It has made comprehensive efforts to improve economic and diplomatic relations with Tokyo and Seoul. The hope is China could make those American allies behave more neutrally in future U.S.-China confrontation.
Right. So, Dr. Chow, aside from security, the other specialty of yours is about, nuclear arms and risks and all of that. So, I would like to know, how exactly is China's nuclear policy evolving? Because right now it doesn't seem very transparent. We don't really have a lot of data. We know that they've faced repeated calls to join these nuclear arms control agreements, all of which they have rejected. So do you see any, perhaps China's shifting nuclear posture threatening the Indo-Pacific region and beyond?
Indeed, China has not officially acknowledged its nuclear expansion. It hasn't provided any information about its ultimate goal of nuclear buildup, what specific military objectives it seeks to achieve from a larger nuclear arsenal. And that secrecy creates a lot of concern in Washington. And there are many strong voices in D.C. calling for the United States to also build up its own nuclear arsenal, because historically the United States has never faced this challenge of two near nuclear peers, Russia and China, and they could cooperate together. So I think the risk of a major power nuclear competition is really high, and the consequence for this region is it will also force many regional countries to invest more in military capabilities, maybe not nuclear, but strategic conventional capabilities to counter the potential threats from China. Because one consequence of a larger Chinese arsenal is it might make China feel safer or more emboldened to engage in conventional level military aggression. So it forces countries in the region to react. And I think all the long-term economic and geopolitical consequences of that will be borne by societies and populations here as well. Not to mention the increasing risk of deliberate or incidental nuclear conflict. And that risk has also increased as a result of a potential Taiwan conflict and the new policies in China, such as to put nuclear weapons on higher alert and to adopt long-term warning posture. Those new policies also increases the risk of incidental or deliberate nuclear conflict.
Yeah. And I think the nuclear space is something that we'll have to watch out for very closely as well. Thank you so much for coming into our studio today and chatting with us, Tong Zhao, Senior Fellow at Carnegie, China. South Korea's suspended President Yoon Suk Yeol made his second appearance at the Constitutional Court to attend a hearing of his ongoing impeachment trial. Now, Mr. Yoon's former Defence Minister Kim Yong-hyun was also there to testify. He was arrested last month for his role in the martial law bid. It was the first time that the two met in person since the martial law attempt on the 3rd of December. The former defense minister testified that he was the one to have written the contentious martial law decree that prohibited political parties from convening. Lawmakers, particularly those from the opposition Democratic Party, have been criticizing Yoon and his aides for allegedly trying to stop lawmakers from entering the National Assembly. Well, the MPs had been attempting to overturn the martial law. Mr. Kim denied receiving orders from the president to detain main opposition party leaders or lawmakers against Yoon. Well, he testified that the suspended president had spent each day thinking of the country, people, and the people's livelihoods. According to Mr. Kim, Mr. Yoon only imposed martial law because he had been pushed to the brink. The Constitutional Court must make a ruling by June 11th. If the verdict is against Yoon, he will be removed from office and elections will be held within 60 days. Also today, the Corruption Investigation Office, or CIO, handed over its case to prosecutors. The CIO had been investigating insurrection and abuse of power charges against Yoon. The office doesn't have the authority to prosecute the president. The Supreme Prosecutor's Office has declined to comment on whether it will take on this case.
기소 여부를 결정해야 하는 검찰이 그동안의 수사 자료를 종합하고 필요한 사항에 대해 추가 수사를 하는 것이 사건의 진상 규명을 위해 효율적이라고 판단하여 금일 공소 제기 요구 결정을 하기에 이른 것입니다.
Time now for a break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, we'll be speaking with another expert about China's latest policy shift to funnel billions of funds into its equity markets. Hello again. Glad to have your company on East Asia tonight. It is now time for your business news with Roland Lim. And Roland, today we are talking about another attempt by Chinese regulators to bolster its flagging stock market. What's that all about?
Yes, the country's financial regulators have announced a slew of measures as geopolitical tensions, a cooling economy, and a property market crisis have hit demand for Chinese equities. Now, China has announced plans to channel hundreds of billions of renminbi annually from state-owned insurers into shares. It's the government's latest efforts to support a struggling stock market. The plan by the country's 6 financial regulators, including the securities regulator, came as Donald Trump began a second stint as U.S. president. CNA's Tan Se-hui has more.
Led by the chief of the China Securities Regulatory Commission, officials from 5 government departments joined hands to map out the latest action plan to boost the country's stock market at a news conference in Beijing. Among other things, officials said large state-owned insurance companies will be encouraged to set aside up to 30% of new annual premiums to be invested on domestic stock markets. Mutual funds will also be encouraged to increase their A-share holdings' tradable market value by at least 10% annually over the next 3 years.
大事不过夜啊，也不能过年，更不能过年，所以我们只争朝夕啊。中长期资金是资本市场的重要的专业投资力量，也是维护市场平稳健康运行的压舱石 稳定器。
China will mark the Spring Festival holiday next Tuesday, and the local stock markets will close for a week until the 4th of February.
They wanted to bring forward policy measures as early as possible so that it can translate into better economic activity afterwards. Because usually right after the Chinese New Year, the stock market will have a period of good performance. It does put stability of the fund as the top priority. Performance is still something in their mind, but they're happy to extend the performance review period from very short term to medium and long term.
Officials also pledged to create a market ecosystem more conducive to long-term investment by strengthening institutions and systems that protect investors' rights.
Because some of the Chinese insurance companies are listed overseas, the investment principles align with the international standard might be something that could benefit their valuation overseas. And also there's a good communication message to the international investors.
Chinese stocks posted their first annual gain last year since 2020 after the government introduced a slew of stimulus measures last September, with the central bank pledging to provide liquidity tools for stock purchases. Boosting the capital markets is seen as an important piece of the authorities' strategy to snap the economy out of its current doldrum. It's hoped that by supporting the stock market, it will eventually have a spillover effect on domestic consumption, which has been sluggish amid a prolonged housing slump and a weak stock market. China has more than 15 million active retail investors. Official data showed more than 200 million people in China have stock accounts, and the number of new stock accounts surged following the September announcement. There are also more than 700 million mutual fund investors in the country. Tan Zihui, CNA, Beijing.
And let's check in on how the markets reacted. Chinese equities had a volatile trading day after Beijing unveiled market-boosting plans. It's a mixed picture. Shanghai Composite up about 0.5% at the closing, while the Shenzhen component, that closed the trading day down about the same margin. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index last trading 0.6% lower. And the blue chip CSI 300 index, it rose as much as 1.8% in intraday trade before erasing losses incurred in the previous session after the new U.S. administration threatened tariffs on Chinese exports. It closed the day with slight gains of 0.18%. Now, for more insight and analysis, we're now joined by Shi Fu. She is China portfolio strategist at Goldman Sachs and is coming to us live from Hong Kong. Shi Fu, good to have you with us on the show. Now, local headwinds aside, today's move, is it also in readiness or concern about a possible U.S. tariff threat by Donald Trump?
Yes, if we look at the market performance, definitely it's a reflection of both the domestic policies as well as external challenges. But today, definitely the new policies announced has attracted attention from investors. We got a lot of investors asking about what a potential capital impact from the policies announced today. Of course, the U.S.-China relations remain a concern, but marginally, we do think the domestic policies may play a more and more important role, especially when we getting closer to the two sessions. We may possibly see more macro policies coming through.
So the government wants to stabilize the stock market and help domestic consumption. The question remains, though, will retail investors participate?
If we look at the current retail engagement, we introduce a barometer that basically measure how the retail engagement is, which include flows, turnovers, as well as other market sentiment measures. And currently, our measure is at 0.4 standard deviation level. That is much higher than previous 2 years, but much lower compared with early October. What we are seeing is domestic retail investors still have huge potential to raise their equity allocation. If we look at Chinese household assets, they only allocate around 10% into equities as well as mutual funds, which is much lower compared with other global markets. So if we look at the household savings, which have also increased during the past 2 to 3 years, that gives them the potential to invest in the equity market if sentiment improves. So what we are seeing now is the investor confidence or consumer confidence matters much more than the buying power. So that's why we still think the policies matters, especially whether it can effectively boost investor sentiment matters more for the coming months.
What about global investors? According to Goldman Sachs, allocation of Chinese stocks by global funds are at its lowest in 5 years. So how much of an impact will the latest announcements have on capital markets inflows towards China?
Yeah. If we look at both global hedge funds and the active funds, their allocation are close to the 5-year low level. For hedge funds, they allocate around 7% in Chinese equities. At the end of September, the level was around 10%. So definitely there has been a meaningful correction over the past months. Similar for global active funds, they only allocate around 6% in Chinese equities, which is also around 5-year lows. What we are seeing now is they are waiting for more policy clarity, especially they want to see more concrete measures in terms of fiscal policy, especially on the demand side, how much fiscal stimulus we can get to boost consumption, to boost consumer confidence. So that's why what we are seeing is a more macro policy would be more important to really turn the flows. In the recent months, we do see hedge funds improve their allocation a little bit, especially they are more willing to engage in all the short-term trading opportunities. So that's why the policy announced today, as it can directly bring more capital to the domestic market. We think it is helpful to raise the equity allocation, including bring in more fund allocation. But what we think is more important to bring sustainable inflows is on fiscal side, on macro policies. So the key events to be watching is the 2 sessions in March.
Shifu, the CSI 300 index currently lower by about 30% from its peak back in 2021. Chinese stocks currently undervalued at this stage compared to their global peers?
Yes, if we compare the valuation of China market with other major global markets, definitely China market is having the most attractive valuation. Due to the past year's market correction, we do see for MSCI China, the PE level now is below 10 times, and for CSI 300, it's also just around 12 to 13 times, which are both below historical average, which kind of reflect the market concerns about U.S.-China relations and the macro challenges. But if we think about the fundamentals, we think in 2025, if we can have consumption recovery at the same time, if inflation can improve, definitely we are expecting earnings growth to improve in 2025. Currently, we are expecting 7% earnings growth for MSCI China and 10% for CSI 300. If that can be achieved, supported by policy, then we are seeing more rooms for valuation to re-rating from the current level.
Shifu, appreciate those insights. She is China Portfolio Strategist at Goldman Sachs. Thank you very much. And I'll be back a little bit later on with more business in the next, well, closer to the end of the hour.
All right, looking forward to that. Thanks so very much, Roland. We are going to go for a break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, Chinese nuclear scientists set a world record in another step towards the future of fusion energy. And Japan predicts a surge in energy use in the coming years, with data centers and chip plants coming online. You're watching East Asia tonight. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and South Korea's Foreign Minister Choi Tae-yul have agreed to continue close cooperation on North Korea's nuclear issues and their trilateral partnership with Japan. South Korea's suspended President Yoon Suk Yeol made his second appearance at the Constitutional Court to attend a hearing of his ongoing impeachment trial. Mr. Yoon's former Defence Minister Kim Yong-hyun was also there to testify. And China's top securities regulator has fleshed out the steps it will take to channel more funds into capital markets as Beijing moves to boost the sector in the face of uncertainties under a second Trump presidency. China is unbeatable when it comes to building hydropower projects, with more mega dams in service than every other nation combined. Now it's going even bigger. The country has recently approved a plan to construct the world's largest hydroelectric dam in southern Tibet. The project could cost as much as $137 billion, more than any other single infrastructure bill on the planet. It will be built on the Yalong-Sangpo River, which is the longest in Tibet. The exact location is unclear, but reports are suggesting that it could be built near the Great Bend in Tibet, close to the China-India border. Here, the river drops 2,000 meters over a short distance of just 50 kilometers. The idea is to harness the river's energy as it rushes down the bend. The 2,900-kilometer waterway flows across the Tibetan plateau to India and then Bangladesh. The mega dam is expected to have an installed capacity of 60,000 megawatts. It will generate 3 times more energy than the Three Gorges Dam, which is the world's biggest by maximum output. Also topping the list of mega dams in China, Baihetan and Xiluotu on the Jinsha River, well, that's the upper course of the Yangtze. And this is how it will compare with other power plants by capacity. China's Three Gorges Dam can produce more than 22,000 megawatts. Baihetan is second at 16,000, and in third place, Itaipu Dam, which is situated along the border of Brazil and Paraguay, with the countries sharing the output. A Chinese state media says that the hydropower project is a major move in the country's green energy transition. Now, hydroelectricity is the world's biggest source of renewable energy, making up 40% of the total capacity ahead of solar and wind. Well, there are challenges, though. The construction site sits on an area that's prone to earthquakes and landslides. Early this month, Tibet was rocked by a powerful earthquake that killed more than 120 people. The project also stoking environmental and security concerns in India, at a time when ties between Beijing and Delhi seem to be warming up. Right, for more insights, let's turn to Amit Ranjan, a research fellow, Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore. Well, thanks, Dr. Ranjan, for joining us today. So, first up, now this new dam is located near the China-India border. How significant do you think is the potential threat to India's water security? That's one. And secondly, how does this, do you project that that's going to worsen existing Sino-Indian tensions?
Yeah, thanks for having CNA. The dam is really a concern for India, especially when the river flows into the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. However, when the river starts moving away from the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh and getting into Assam, the river becomes more fatter. So it may not concern in other parts of India, but at least in Arunachal Pradesh, it is a big concern. And therefore, India has already expressed its concern to the Chinese officials, where the Chinese said that this is run of the river dam, so it's not going to affect India much. Second thing I want to inform that as India and China, they have the MOUs on water data sharing, but those MOUs has already been expired. So the renewal of MOU, they say that it's still in process. Then we have the India and China have ELM, export level mechanism, where the two countries can discuss and talk about the projects and the water issue. So these this ELM, under ELM, they can discuss this matter and share the information. I believe that with the change of relationship, political relationship between India and China since November 2024, I believe that they will renew their MOUs, discuss this project, and if there are any other projects in the ELM meeting, and China, the upper European country, will clear out any concern or address any concern which India has on this dam or any other project which they are planning to build
So I hear what you're
Sure,
saying,
sure.
Dr. Ranjan, that diplomacy can possibly, bridge this divide. But then the thing as well is that this dam is located in a high seismic zone, right? So, I mean, if a major earthquake were to cause the dam to fail for some reason, what kind of ripple effects would it have for the region?
It will have a disastrous effect if we have got to be informed or viewers that there was an earthquake on 7 Jan in Tibet and Nepal border region, where more than 120 people died and more than 180 people were injured. The numbers may be more than what media presented. So it's going to be very big disastrous effect if suppose if there's a dam and then earthquake takes place. It will have a spillover effect of many other parts of India, and then may go also to Bangladesh. But the Chinese say that they have this EIA, but that EIA assessment and ecological thing that I believe that it's better if they shared with Indian authority also, because the effect is on lower riparian also. So if it happens, and there are other ecological effects also, not only earthquake, like when you build dam, you need the environment to clear, you want people to move from that place to other place. So all these side effects, spillover, that has its impact on the lower riparian region also.
Right, I hear what you're saying, Dr. Ranjan. But China has talked a lot about how it's all about reaching its green energy goals. But how do you assess the trade-offs though between achieving carbon neutrality and also the socio-environmental costs that comes with it?
That's a big when you talk about the achieving green energy by building hydropower projects and taking other necessary measures. It impacts people, especially those who stay near those projects. So it's a very tricky situation how you move. If you look at the media reports, especially the non-Chinese, there have been lots of protests in Tibet also last year also, and there been also protests on other projects, because many in Tibet they believe that these dams, with the help of these dams, people in the mainland China are going to get benefit and not us. And there's also a displacement in everything. So it's a very tricky situation to say whether you have to go for development or displacement. Or same environment. So whatever the state, whosoever is in power, he or she has to look at the both sides, so that you do not disturb environmental and the development balance.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the displacement issue as well, because typically building a dam of this scale often results in the displacement of large communities. So how do you think the concerns of those affected, being addressed, whether it's compensation or looking into the long-term well-being of the people there?
It's always every big dam, every big project causes displacement of the local population, and compensation also, it's whether the compensation is adequate or not. That is first thing. And second, when you displace people from the place where they are living for decades, you displace to some aloof place, and it take time. And then how the host community, people who are already staying there, how they behave, what's their attitude towards the displaced community. Because sometimes what happens is due to the cultural differences or many other differences, when the displaced people go, there's always sometimes happen that clash takes place between the people, host and the guest, host and the displaced. And also there's also cultural involvement. Displaced people, it doesn't mean that they only live in a environment or ecological system. There's also cultural involvement where they live. So that all gets disturbed. So they are the most affected. Compensation, you pay, but sometimes what happens that compensations are not enough to live a life.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks so very much for sharing your thoughts and insights with us, Amit Ranjan, a Research Fellow, Institute of South Asian Studies from the National University of Singapore. Well, meantime, China, in its quest for energy security, is looking at other forms of power generation to satiate its growing demand. Its scientists have set a record in a step towards nuclear fusion power generation. It's a process that merges hydrogen atoms under extreme heat and pressure to generate energy. Now, researchers operating an experimental reactor known as a tokamak have managed to sustain fusion for more than 1,000 seconds on Monday. This, apparently, is a new world record. The duration milestone is seen as a necessity to simulate the conditions for an efficient and sustainable fusion energy plant.
这个建筑是我们一次装入的一个重大突破，也是学术军备界研究的一个重大突破。它是标志着，托克马克从实验基础研究到工程实践的一个重要的里程碑。
The technology still needs years of refinement and testing before it can be actually used in an actual power plant. Fusion, which uses abundant raw materials such as seawater, will not create long-lived nuclear waste and is seen a much safer way to generate energy than fission nuclear reactors that are widespread across the world today. A radioactive meltdown such as the one which occurred in the Fukushima disaster is not possible under fusion. A high energy demand also seen in Japan, where usage is expected to grow nearly 6% over the next decade. Officials say that power demand for industry is set to lead the rise with nearly a 20% surge, while household electricity consumption, on the other hand, anticipated to decline some 5%. The decrease is due to a shrinking population and advancements in energy conservation. Officials are also preparing for a rise in electricity demand from new data centers and chip plants. Up until 2023, the government had been predicting future electricity demand would decline due to the adoption of energy-efficient equipment. Last year's data revised this outlook to reflect the increase. All right, time now for another break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Japanese police on the hunt for a man suspected of stabbing 3 people outside a train station in central Japan. Plus, worries over deteriorating U.S.-China relations, top concerns of American firms in China. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia Tonight. As promised, Roland Lim is back with more business news, and you've got some economic report to share with us.
Thanks, Natalie. Now, South Korea's Kospi Index under pressure as investors pass through the country's latest economic report. Fourth quarter GDP data show its economy expanding at its slowest pace in 6 quarters in the wake of the worst political crisis it's seen in decades. Also checking in on the Korean won, well, it is slightly weaker against the greenback by 0.11%, 1,436.65 to the dollar. Remember, it slid to a 16-year low in December in the face of all these uncertainties. It bounced back this week to its strongest level in a month as markets await clarity on Trump's tariff plans. The country's GDP barely grew in the final months of 2024, rising just 1.2% on year in the fourth quarter. And that will take South Korea's full-year growth to just 2%, slower than the expected pace for the period. Now, growth was largely driven by modest increases in private and government consumption. But construction investments, well, that took a big hit as fewer building projects went ahead amid the martial law crisis in December. The Bank of Korea downgraded its growth outlook for the country this year, expecting GDP to grow between 1.6 and 1.7%, down from the previous forecast of 1.9. South Korea's SK Hynix forecast sales at its high-end semiconductors used for generative AI chipsets that will more than double this year. That's after it posted a quarterly profit record that beat the results estimates for rival Samsung. World's second largest memory chip maker's operating profit increased more than 20% to $5.6 billion in the fourth quarter on year. Its sales vaulted nearly 35% to about $14 billion. Now, for the whole of 2024, the company's operating profit reached around $16 billion, turning to profit from an operating loss of more than $5 billion the previous year. Now, the earnings beat market expectations. It's also the first time that SK Hynix quarterly profit has beaten rival Samsung's operating profit for all its sectors. The company has been increasingly outperforming rivals Samsung and US-based Micron Technology in recent quarters, as it benefits the most from AI-driven appetite for high-end memory chips. But profit growth slowed in the fourth quarter from the previous 3 months as increased output from Chinese rivals weighed on the memory chip industry as a whole. Shares in SK Hynix, a key supplier to AI chip giant NVIDIA, however, fell by as much as 4.7% following the earnings call and ended the day, nearly 3% weaker. And that's as investors took profits following a surge of about 30% so far this year on renewed optimism over AI spending. Another South Korean giant delivering its quarterly report card but failing to impress, Hyundai Motor reported a 17% fall in fourth quarter operating profit, declining more than analysts estimated as it spent more on promotions in a slowing car market. Hyundai, which together with affiliate Kia is the world's third biggest automaker by sales, reported operating profits of close to $2 billion for the October to December period. And that compares with nearly $2.4 billion the same period a year earlier. During the quarter, Hyundai's global retail sales slipped as solid sales in the US and India were offset by sluggish demand in South Korea, Europe, and China. Analysts say a weaker local currency against the US dollar helped raise Hyundai's repatriated earnings, but also increased foreign debt and related financial costs, weighing on profits. In addition, global automakers are bracing for policy uncertainty in the US, the world's second biggest auto market that threatens to dampen demand. But investors shrugging off the tepid results, Hyundai shares rising 1.4% after the earnings announcement, lost some ground, but ending the day just a quarter of, more than 1% in the green. Worries of further deterioration in US-China relations are the top concern for most American firms in China. That's according to an annual survey conducted by the American Chamber of Commerce. The survey, which polled some 368 companies between October and November, reveals that 51% of respondents are worried about the future of bilateral ties. Now, that's as the highest percentage in 5 years. The findings also show a growing reluctance to invest in China. While 48% of companies still view China as the global top 3 investment priority, the number of firms no longer considering China a preferred destination has more than doubled, 21% from before the pandemic. Geopolitical tensions, policy uncertainty, and trade disputes were among major concerns for respondents. The report comes just days after US President Donald Trump's return to office and amidst growing trade tensions. On Tuesday, Mr. Trump's administration announced it was considering a 10% punitive duty on Chinese imports starting the 1st of February, linked to China's role in the global fentanyl supply chain. And that'll do it for business. Telly.
Thanks so very much, Roland. In other news, a Chinese court has sentenced a man to death over a knife attack in Suzhou last year, which left a bus attendant dead. The attacker, 52-year-old Zhou Jiasheng, had stabbed 3 people at a bus stop near the Japanese school of Suzhou in June. While the injured victims were a Japanese mother and child, while a Chinese bus attendant who defended them succumbed to her injuries days later. The case has drawn considerable attention in Japan, with the Japanese consul general and staff present at the hearing today. Now, this follows the execution of 2 men who carried out separate deadly attacks last November. The 62-year-old Fan Wei-chu, who caused the deaths of at least 35 people when he drove an SUV into a crowd of people exercising outside a stadium in Zhuhai, and 21-year-old Xu Jiajin, who went on a stabbing spree at his vocational institute in Wuxi, killing 8 and wounding 17 others. Police are still searching for a man who's suspected of stabbing 3 people outside a train station in central Japan. One of the victims, a 49-year-old man, has died. The attack took place last night at a bus stop outside Nagano station. Police suspect that the assailant targeted people at random. Victims described the suspect as a middle-aged man who fled to the south from the station. Just over a month ago, there was another random knife attack at a McDonald's in Fukuoka Prefecture. which left a junior high school student dead. Now, some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. Japanese TV star Masahiro Nakai is retiring after a sexual misconduct scandal. According to the Asahi Shimbun, the variety show host apologized to his fans and said that he is sorry for causing trouble. Chinese President Xi Jinping braved ice-cold weather to visit a village hard hit by flooding last year. Xinhua says the leader went to Liaoning province to see how people are doing in their new homes with Chinese New Year around the corner. And the CEO of Hong Kong airline Greater Bay has said sorry after the carrier cancelled nearly 130 flights. They were meant to fly between Japan, South Korea and Thailand in February and March. More than 5,000 travelers are affected by those cancellations. Today marks the first day that same-sex couples can officially register their marriages in Thailand. The country is the first in Southeast Asia to legalise same-sex unions. Saksit Saasombat reports from Bangkok, where an event was being held specially to mark the occasion.
It's a long-awaited day for LGBTQ plus couples, but it's become now a reality. They can get legally married in Thailand. Newlyweds can sign up in all district offices across the country, many of them colorfully decorated for this special occasion. In Bangkok, a special event at a shopping mall is being held where a pop-up registration is prepared to welcome up to 300 couples to tie the knot. The first ones have been here since the early morning, and of course they're happy on their special day.
คือเราจะแต่งงานกันอยู่แล้วค่ะใช่ค่ะเราจะจัดงานมงคลสมรสเพื่อเป็นการเฉลิมฉลองสิทธิสมรสเท่าเทียมของเราเพราะว่าจริงๆเราแต่งงานกันมาได้ตั้งแต่แรกแต่เราไม่มีกฎหมายเราก็ไม่เข้าใจว่าแล้วเราจะแต่งงานกันไปทำไมค่ะแล้วทีนี้พอกฎหมายมันผ่านแล้วอันดับแรกก็คือแต่งงานเนาะพอแต่งงานเสร็จประกันที่เราทำให้กันประกันบ้านประกันอุบัติเหตุต่างๆก็จะรีบเปลี่ยนชื่อกันและกันทรัพย์สินแล้วกัน
ก็ถ้าผมว่ามันคือสิ่งที่มันเป็นสิ่งที่ดีเพราะว่าคือความรู้สึกของคนมันไม่ได้อยู่ที่ว่าเราเกิดเป็นเพศอะไร
Same-sex marriage legislation was passed in Parliament last year, but for non-heterosexual couples in Thailand, it has been a journey that has taken over 20 years to get to this point. They can now enjoy inheritance and adoption rights, and the law now uses gender-neutral terms such as individuals and marriage partners instead of men, women, husband and wives. However, even though Thailand is considered friendly towards the LGBTQ plus community, but they still face legal hurdles to having the full rights accorded to heterosexual couples. A gender recognition bill is still stuck in Parliament, and surrogacy reform to allow them the same privileges as heterosexual parents also is still in the drafting phase. Nevertheless, this marks a major milestone for LGBTQ plus rights in Thailand. Same-sex marriage remains illegal in most parts of Asia, so Thailand is one of the few places in the region that allows it. Saksit Saasombat, CNA Bangkok.
And on that note, we wrap up East Asia tonight this Thursday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia and look us up on Facebook and on YouTube. Thanks for your company.